It started with something trivial, a dinner plan, of all things. Alex and Sam were texting back and forth about where to meet up, throwing out restaurant suggestions and times. At first, it was no big deal. Sam mentioned a new Italian place across town. Alex suggested the usual bar closer to his apartment. Sam pushed back, saying he didn't feel like the bar's greasy food. That's when Alex's patience ran out. "Fine," Alex snapped. "Let's just do whatever you want." Like always, he tossed his phone onto the couch, pacing the room. Why couldn't people just go along with his suggestions for once? Why was it always an argument? He ranted under his breath, feeling the familiar wave of irritation rising, but then the phone buzzed again. A new message from Sam. It was short just. A few words, but it stopped Alex in his tracks. "Alex, it's not that big of a deal, but honestly, you always do this. I don't know if you realize it, but you make everything about what you want. It's exhausting." Exhausting? Alex stared at the screen. Was Sam seriously accusing him of being difficult? Of course he wasn't the problem. He shot back a response, defending himself. "I'm just saying it'd be nice if someone listened to me for once." But as soon as he sent it, his stomach sank. Something about Sam's tone didn't feel like the usual back and forth. It felt final. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Alex didn't go to dinner, didn't watch TV, didn't even scroll his social feeds like he usually did. Instead, he kept replaying Sam's words in his mind. "You always do this. Did he always do this?" He thought about past conversations with Sam and then with other friends. He thought about the times he'd stormed out of group outings because things didn't go his way. He thought about the fights he'd had with his ex, about what movie to see, about where to live, about what to have for breakfast. It wasn't just Sam. This had happened before again and again. The pattern was so obvious now, it was like someone had turned on a spotlight. Alex felt exposed, vulnerable. He wanted to dismiss it, to call Sam dramatic and move on. But deep down, a voice he couldn't ignore whispered, "What if he's..." Right? That whisper lingered long after he went to bed. It followed him into restless sleep, where dreams of heated arguments and old grudges played on repeat. When he woke, bleary-eyed and unrested, Alex knew that something had shifted. He couldn't unhear what Sam had said. The words had cracked open a door he hadn't wanted to face, and through it, he caught his first glimpse of a harsh truth. The common denominator in all those conflicts, all those disappointments, all those strained relationships, wasn't the world. It was him. The days that followed were quieter than usual. Alex withdrew, not out of anger or resentment, but because his mind was stuck in a loop. Sam's words had pried something loose, some protective shell he'd wrapped himself in for years, and now the pieces were lying scattered in front of him. He couldn't stop thinking about the times he deflected blame onto others. His chest tightened every time a memory surfaced of an old fight, a job dispute, or a conversation with his family where he painted himself as the victim. Evening, while sitting in his small apartment, Alex tried to distract himself with the usual routine, streaming a show, scrolling his phone, cracking open a cold beer. But nothing felt right. The show felt dull, the notifications felt empty, and the beer tasted bitter. After a while, he shut everything off, sat back in his chair, and let the silence take over. It was just him, alone with his thoughts. This time, he decided not to turn away. He pictured that argument with Sam again, replaying every word in his mind. He recalled how his voice had risen, how he cut Sam off mid-sentence, how quick he'd been to assume that his own frustrations were the only ones that mattered. Then other memories crept in. A fight with a past girlfriend. He'd sworn she was always critical of him. But looking back now, he saw how he had brushed off her concerns, how he had dismissed her as being too sensitive. He thought about his old coworker, Janet, who had tried to give him feedback on a project. He'd interrupted her, laughing, and told her she didn't understand what the client wanted. That was years ago, but the way her face fell still haunted him now. For the first time, Alex stopped seeing himself as the misunderstood protagonist of these stories. Instead, he saw someone who refused to take responsibility. He had spent years looking through a window at the world, finding fault in everyone and everything, without once considering that the reflection in the glass might hold some answers. And now, with nothing to distract him, he turned that window into a mirror. It was sobering, uncomfortable, humbling, but also strangely liberating. If he was part of the problem, then he could also be part of the solution. Alex realized he had been living in a cycle: defensiveness, denial, and disappointment. Breaking that cycle wouldn't be easy, but it had to start with a willingness to be honest with himself. "I'm not perfect," he admitted aloud, the words sounding foreign but true. "And I've made a lot of mistakes." For the first time, instead of making excuses, Alex gave himself permission to simply face that truth. There was no self-pity, no melodrama, just a quiet acknowledgement that he had some work to do. He realized that fixing himself wasn't about beating himself up. It was. After the initial shock of self-awareness wore off, Alex knew he couldn't stop there. It wasn't enough to simply admit that he had flaws. He had to do something about them. He had to prove to himself more than anyone that change was possible. The first thing Alex decided was that he needed a plan. He wasn't going to fix everything overnight, and the enormity of it all could easily overwhelm him. So he broke it down. Start small. Take it one step at a time. He pulled out a notebook and jotted down a list. Listen more. Ask questions instead of arguing. Take responsibility when I mess up. Apologize when I'm wrong. Simple, but not easy. At work, Alex made it a point to really listen to his colleagues' suggestions. When a project hit a snag, he resisted the urge to jump into defense mode. Instead, he asked himself what he could have done differently. The first time, he said to a teammate, "You're right. I should have caught that mistake. I'll fix it." The words felt stiff and unnatural. But the reaction he got return surprise, followed by appreciation, gave him a small rush of pride. This was what accountability looked like, and it felt better than the temporary satisfaction of deflecting blame. At home, Alex approached his relationship with a newfound humility. When his partner expressed frustration, Alex didn't shut down or push back. Instead, he asked, "What can I do to make this better?" The first few times, the question felt foreign, but gradually, he realized that simply being open to feedback made a difference. It showed he cared enough to change, and in return, it opened the door to more honest, productive conversations. As weeks turned into months, Alex noticed subtle shifts in his behavior. He started taking note of patterns. He could sense when defensiveness was about to kick in, and he learned to pause, breathe, and choose a different response. Sometimes he still got it wrong. Sometimes his temper flared, or he caught himself slipping into old habits. But instead of giving up, he reminded himself that this was part of the process. Change wasn't about being perfect. It was about being persistent. Beyond his personal interactions, Alex began seeking out resources to deepen his growth. He read books on emotional intelligence and communication. He listened to podcasts featuring speakers who had faced their own struggles and come out stronger. He even signed up for a weekend workshop on conflict resolution, which gave him tools and techniques he could use every day. It wasn't about reinventing himself. It was about building a foundation layer by layer so he could handle life's challenges with greater grace and resilience. What surprised Alex most was how these small efforts started to pay off in unexpected. The changes in Alex's life were subtle at first, small victories like apologizing after a misunderstanding or taking a coworker's feedback without getting defensive. But over time, these small changes snowballed. Alex's new mindset began, affecting not only himself but also the people around him. One day, his partner, Emily, commented on how much calmer their relationship felt. "You're different lately," she said, stirring her coffee at the kitchen counter. "It's like you're really hearing me now. I don't feel like I have to fight to be understood anymore." The words hit Alex in a way he didn't expect. In the past, he bristled at feedback, no matter how gently it was given. But now, he felt pride a healthy kind, knowing that he'd earned that change. Instead of arguing or explaining himself, he simply smiled. "I'm trying," he said, and he meant it at work. Alex's efforts to listen and collaborate paid off in ways he couldn't have predicted. A teammate who had once kept him at arm's length started asking for his input on tough problems. When their department faced a tight deadline, Alex stepped up to take on extra tasks without complaining. His manager noticed a shift, and when performance reviews came around, Alex heard words he'd never expected. "You've shown a lot of growth this year. Your attitude has made a real difference." What surprised Alex most, however, was the effect he had on old friends like Sam. After their argument, Alex had reached out to apologize genuinely, without excuses. It wasn't just the apology that mended their friendship, though. Over the next few months, Alex's actions spoke louder than his words. He showed Sam he was willing to put in the work, to stay accountable, and to maintain the respect that every friendship deserves. "Honestly," Sam said during one of their meetups, "it's cool seeing you own your stuff. It makes me want to do better, too." Hearing that was a revelation. It wasn't just about Alex fixing himself anymore. His growth created a ripple effect. By owning his flaws and striving to improve, he made it easier for others to do the same. His vulnerability gave people permission to reflect on their own challenges. It showed them that it was okay to admit when they were wrong, and that growth wasn't a weakness, it was a strength. As time went on, Alex began sharing his journey, not in a boastful way, but in a genuine effort to help others. A younger colleague who was struggling with a difficult boss came to Alex for advice. Instead of giving him canned answers, Alex shared his own experiences with defensiveness and blame shifting. He encouraged the colleague to focus on what he could control and to approach challenges with patience and humility. "I'm not saying it's easy," Alex told him, "but every little step